Here we have the map of Israel, northern Israel, and here in this corner here, we have Mount Carmel National Park. Okay, so that's the Mount Carmel. And actually, what you'll find is that this is the highest peak in this area, the highest peaks of the Mount Carmel, but the Mount Carmel actually extends. It's called the Mount Carmel Range, extends all the way down past this place, this interesting place here called Megiddo. And obviously, this place is utilized in the book of Revelation to portray one of the final battles, let's say spiritual battles, before the end of the human history. Now we read about the Battle of Armageddon in the book of Revelation, chapter 16, close to the end of the story of the Bible. Now, when you read Revelation chapter 16, let's have a look at that. We'll just read that. Revelation chapter 16, it speaks of Armageddon, and the book actually says this should be read in Hebrew. This should be read in Hebrew language. The Revelation is written in Greek, but it says this term reads in Hebrew. Okay, so Revelation 16, 15 and 16 in chapter 16. Behold, I am coming, Jesus says. Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. So these are all the kings of the earth, not just one or the other, all the kings of the earth. They're all gathered together in the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. Okay, so if you read actually this word in Greek, it's not it's ha. It's Harmageddon. And if you read it in Hebrew, Har means mountain, and Mageddon means of Megiddo. Yeah, so it's Mount of Megiddo, Harmageddon. So it's written in Greek, but it's actually a Hebrew word, combination of words, which means Mount of Megiddo, Harmageddon, Mount of Megiddo. So this is the place here. This is Megiddo, right here, somewhere here, and we are looking at a mountain actually here. So this place called Armageddon in the book of Revelation, it's not actually Megiddo. That is not correct. The accurate location is actually the Mount of Megiddo. So Armageddon is speaking about a mountain, not a town. And obviously the mount next to Megiddo extends all the way from here, all the way north to the highest peaks of Mount Carmel. So this is the Mount Carmel range. So it seems that the book of Revelation, when speaking of Armageddon, seems to be referring to the Mount Carmel, or the Mount Carmel range, which is right here, or coming through the place called Megiddo. Now the book of Kings, First Kings, tells us about Elijah's encounter with the king Ahab and his encounter with the prophets and priests of Baal, the false god Baal. And this is the place really where the story is unraveling in this area of Israel. Because if you go a little bit towards here, Yisrael, that's actually Jezreel in the Bible, or Yisrael, as the Hebrews would say, Yisrael. That is the place where King Ahab had his palace. So you read the story that King Ahab and his good wife Jezebel, they're taking residence in a palace in Yisrael or Jezreel. And there's a story about how Ahab was very sad because he couldn't get the vineyards of from some man, and then Jezebel killed the man and took the vineyard, and that was in the place called Jezreel or Israel. So this is where Ahab and Jezebel are stationed, Israel. And then we have the story of prophet Elijah sending message to Ahab. And this is all taking place in 1 Kings chapters 18, and then following that chapter 19. And Elijah sends messenger to Ahab, who was in Israel or Jezreel, in this place here, in his palace, and tells him to come to the Mount Carmel. And he calls upon all the prophets of Baal and the priests of Baal to come. And they're both going to bring sacrifices to their gods. The whole point of this is really to show which God is the true God. That is what the Mount Carmel exhibition is all about. There are two altars, one built to Baal, and there is another altar later on built by Elijah. Well-watered altar, and we have the story, the prophets of Baal, priests of Baal, dancing around, cutting themselves all day long, and nothing happens. And then Elijah cheekily tells them, perhaps your God has fallen asleep. Maybe it was a long day, he got a bit tired, and now he's asleep. And then after they attempt to get a sign from Baal, nothing happens. Then Elijah builds an altar, pours lots of water on it, and fire comes down from heaven. And basically, this display confirms that Elijah's God is the true God. And this is the God that is called the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob throughout the Old Testament up to this time in the biblical story. This is the Creator God from Genesis chapter 1. This is the true God. So the whole point of the Mount Carmel exhibition is the point of the conflict between the true God and the false God, or true religion and false religion. And through the exhibition on the Mount Carmel, on the two altars, it's demonstrated that God of Elijah is the true God. Now it's interesting because this story also extends and into the book of Revelation. It parallels this event, but in a slightly different way. Whilst in the book of Kings, it's the fire from heaven comes down to burn the offering on the altar by Yahweh, God of Elijah. In the book of Revelation, when we move past chapter 12, chapter 13, towards the end of the story of the Bible, we have two beasts mentioned. The second beast that performs the signs in front of the first beast on behalf of the first beast. This second beast seems to have the power also to bring fire down from heaven, just like Elijah did, or Elijah's God did on Mount Carmel. So this is another parallel. We have this beast that can do the Carmel miracle, and we have then the Battle of Armageddon. So these two are really, really linked in the book of Revelation, just as we find this same scenario in the first Kings and the story of Elijah and Ahab and prophets of Baal. And what happens in the book of Revelation, this second beast, or the beast from the earth, has the power to bring to show signs and perform signs and miracles, and even to bring fire down from heaven. So this is clearly paralleling the event from the Mount Carmel when we read about the story of Elijah, where the fire came down from heaven to confirm that Elijah's God is the true God, Yahweh. But in the book of Revelation, actually, it's not the true God, it's actually the false God who seems to have the power to bring down fire from heaven, or whatever that means. Could be symbolic, perhaps, probably symbolic, but it's actually not God who will do things right at the end of history, but something else or somebody else will perform some strange, convincing signs and wonders and miracles that will cause the whole world to go after it and go astray. And and forgotten the true God and turned against true God. So this is what we find. This is all based on this story of Elijah and the Mount Carmel. Now, let's have a look. This is all very close together. So Megiddo is right here. And we find that Israel, that's where Ahab and Jezebel are. So this is about, let's have a look. 2 kilometers. That's about, I believe, 6 miles from Megiddo, Israel. It's about 6 miles from Megiddo, not too far away. Then the Mount Carmel, let's say the highest peak here, somewhere here. It's about maybe 7, 8 miles from Megiddo. Or perhaps the mounts of Megiddo extend all the way down here, so it could be somewhere here. Don't know. Somewhere here in the mountain range of Carmel, Elijah calls upon Ahab to come and witness the miracle from the God of Israel. Well, let's say the place called Megiddo is right in between Ahab, who stands as the representative of the false religion, and here we have Elijah on the other side on Mount Carmel as the representative of true religion and true God. Megiddo is right in between, yeah, and perhaps that's why Megiddo is mentioned in Revelation. It's right at the center of what's happening here, and the Mount of Megiddo is right here somewhere, which is symbolizing the final battle called Armageddon, which seems to be, if it's based on this story of Elijah, it seems to be a spiritual battle, not a military battle, but spiritual battle between true religion and false religion, between true God and false God, between Christ and the devil. Basically, that's it. That's the conclusion of the story. And what happens after? What happens with Elijah after this battle of Armageddon in Elijah's day? After the battle of Armageddon ended, it wasn't actually the end of the story. There's this massive thing that happened to Elijah, and massive miracle, massive sign from heaven, massive wonder. It's Elijah's Mount Carmel victory. It was exhilarating. What happened after that? Let's have a look. Now we're going to the First Kings, chapter 18. So that's the story of the Mount Carmel. We come to the end of chapter 18. And we are told that there was no rain for 3.5 years, and now the rain is coming. And Elijah tells Ahab, prepare your chariot. This is verse 44. Prepare your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. Verse 45. Now it happened in the meantime that the sky became black with clouds and wind, and there was a heavy rain. So Ahab rode away and went to Jezreel. Okay, that's the place here. Israel. He went back to his palace right here in Israel. Then the hand of the Lord came upon Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran ahead of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel or Israel. So whether Elijah was running all the way from the highest peaks of the Mount Carmel here, that will be probably about 15 miles from Israel, from Ahab's palace, or maybe here near Megiddo, from this part of the mountain range. He would run about 6 miles. In any case, he seems to have received some kind of supernatural strength from God. Just as there is a supernatural fire coming down from heaven, now Elijah has supernatural strength that he manages to run ahead of Ahab, who's got a horse and a chariot. He's running really fast, Elijah, and he comes ahead of Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. So this was an exhilarating, massive miracle performed and experienced by Elijah. He was on the seventh heaven. But this battle of Armageddon and this supernatural running from Elijah, it was not the end of the story. After this massive high of Elijah, there, if you fly high, you drop very low after that. You cannot go in. There is only one way to go after you fly as high as you can. Then we continue to read the story in chapter 19. And we are told that Ahab King Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and also how he had executed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." So there was a death sentence proclaimed against Elijah. Tomorrow, by this time, you shall be killed. And when he saw that, this is Elijah now, who was victorious on the Mount Carmel and who ran as strong as Samson to Israel, the place where Ahab's residence was. Now we are told Elijah, when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servants there. Left his servant there. Now, this is the northern part of the kingdom. This is Israel. This is not Judah. Let me show you now how far he went. I don't know if any of that supernatural strength was left in his legs, but he was running, running, running. Not 6 or 15 miles. Let's zoom out. He went all the way south into the kingdom of Judah, even further south than Jerusalem. Now, where is Beersheba? Oh, there it is, right down here. How many miles is that? All the way from, let's have a look, from, we are somewhere here. Megiddo, is it? Okay, so it's from here to there. Let's say that's about 20 kilometers. Let's zoom out a little bit. 50 kilometers, right? So 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, let's say, about 250 kilometers, which is, I don't know, 170 miles. That's as far as Elijah went to Beersheba to hide from Jezebel. Now, what we read here in the story further. So Elijah went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. Okay, so that could be that's the area of wilderness there, and came and sat under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die. Okay, and Elijah prayed that he might die and said, "It is enough, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." I would suggest to you that this gives us a clue as to why Elijah was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire. Some people think that he was this wonderful, super character, even without sin, and that's why he deserved to be taken directly into God's presence in heaven. But we don't read that. It looks like at this moment his fear of Jezebel, the fear for his life, took over his faith. His faith collapsed somewhat, and he really struggled, and he could not cope anymore. He prayed that he might die and said, "It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." He didn't say, Elijah didn't say, "Oh Lord, I'm better than my fathers. I have reached this superior spiritual state now after this miracle in Carmel. I'm practically without sin. That's it. You can take me to heaven now." No, he doesn't say that. It's enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. He prays to die. And then an angel comes and strengthens Elijah. And there's some food provided for him. And then God calls him to come even further south, further down, all the way to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And then God speaks to him. And God reveals himself to Elijah. And we are told in verse 11, "The great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, in fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice." So it was when Elijah heard it that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. I alone am left." Now, this is a key to the question why Elijah is feeling so despondent and depressed and in being in despair. I alone am left. All the work that he has done through the supernatural power of God and everything before that, he can't see any fruit to his labor. I alone am left. There's nobody who has responded to this work that I have done in your name, God says. I've been very, very zealous, but I can't see any fruit to my labor. Later on, God tells him there's actually 7,000 in Israel that are still worshiping me, but you don't know about them. But that's the point. He doesn't know about them. He does all this work for God. He's very zealous. He says, I've been very zealous for you, but I'm the only one. There's nobody else following you. Just let me die, he says. So he's been so discouraged because his labor does not yield any fruit. So just imagine if you're a farmer and you keep sowing seeds. 1 year, nothing grows. Second year, you sow seeds, nothing grows in the summer. Third year, let's say 3.5 years of Elijah before the rain comes. Third year, you sow seeds and nothing grows. Well, would you continue to do the same thing if you keep sowing seeds and cultivating ground and there's no fruit, nothing's growing? It's pointless. There's no point. So this is how Elijah feels. I've been very zealous. I've done all these things and even this massive thing on the Mount Carmel, but I alone am left. It's pointless. All this stuff I'm doing, nobody is listening. Nobody cares. I alone am left. Just let me die. It's pointless. It's senseless. It's meaningless. That's what Elijah tells God. Okay, so he doesn't feel very spiritually high. He doesn't feel sinless. This is not the reason why God takes him to heaven. God actually takes him into heaven, into chariot of fire, because Elijah can't cope anymore. That's the reason. Not because he's super superior, Superman, super spiritual, but because he's he's uh, he's hit the rock bottom, a dark place. He's really weak. He's depressed, despondent. He's in despair, and he can't cope anymore. And this is the reason why God takes him to heaven, not because he's strong, but because he's weak. Not because he's without sin, but because he's really struggling in the pit of darkness. And God shows his mercy. This is what God says. So Elijah says in verse 14, Lord, I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. What's the point? You may as well let me die now. Then the Lord God said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Also you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. Now listen to this. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. In your place. So God is actually hearing the despondent prophet Elijah in the same chapter. In verse 4, Elijah tells God, and he prayed that he might die and said, It is enough. It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And then, if you read in the same chapter, towards the end of the chapter, the conclusion is God tells him in verse 16, and you shall anoint Elisha as a prophet in your place. In other words, God tells him, I'm giving you an early retirement. And basically, what we read here in the story of Elijah is a case of a burnout. This is a spiritual leader who has experienced proper 100% complete burnout, and he could not cope anymore. He could not function anymore. All he could do now was just move his legs, run up and down the promised land, up and down Israel, Judah, even further down towards Mount Horeb. Just his legs. He just went running, 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 uh, all over the place. But he could not do anything else in his mind, in his heart. He was burnt out completely. And the story suggests that God has understood this, and God showed him favor, showed him mercy. And he actually says, okay, I'll uh, I'll call somebody else to take your place. You can anoint Elisha, and he will be a prophet instead of you. And later on, we read in the story that Elijah is taken to heaven in the chariots of fire, and then Elisha is saying he's waving his goodbyes and crying, and that is the end of the story of Elijah. Now, if you continue to parallel this with the book of Revelation and read the story where in Revelation, once you pass chapter 12, it's all about the end time events, end of history. This final beast, last beast mentioned, beast from the earth, that comes on the scene, that can perform miracles and signs and wonders, even fire coming down from heaven. So this is the first mark of the story of Elijah. So we have this final spiritual battle where the false god of this earth performs some strange wonders to cause all the earth to go after him. And then in chapter 16, we have uh, the final plagues poured out on the planet Earth. And then the sixth plague it contains this battle of Armageddon or Harmageddon, the Mount of Megiddo battle. So this is the second point that brings us back to the story of Elijah. And this battle will, in some way, show and confirm who is the false God and who is the true God. Uh, Whenever this happens, however it happens, I have no idea, not a clue, but there'll be something taking place, something massive that will demonstrate who is the true God, which clearly in the story of Revelation is the creator God, because the message is after chapter 12 to chapter 16, we are called to remember the creator and worship him who created the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that. So clearly the creator God is the true God against somebody else who imitates the creator God, who is a false God on this earth. So this is not the parallel with the story of Elijah. But also we find that this is not the end. The Revelation 16 is not the end. We have the Battle of Armageddon mentioned in the sixth plague, then we have the seventh plague, and then there's two more chapters before Christ comes and the end of history arrives. And these two chapters are all about the fall of Babylon, which ultimately represents false religion, false religions, the false religion, and it's been clearly manifested as such and showed that it is a false religion, and all the kings of the earth now turn against this false religion, and they destroy her flesh and burned it down, burned her body down, symbolically speaking. That's the continuation of the story. So Armageddon is not the end of the story, just like in the story of Elijah. It was a massive, big event, but then after that, Elijah had to run, and run more, and run more, and run for his life. And then at the end, God gave him an early retirement. And this really parallels what will happen after the Battle of Armageddon, after the fall of Babylon. And only then, at the end of the story, the true God shows himself, shows his face, second coming of Christ. And only then his people are liberated. But just like Elijah, some people think the last generation of people on this earth will be sinless and perfect, without sin, and that's why they're taken to heaven. No, no, no. This is based on the story of Elijah. There's struggle. There is struggle as much as Elijah did, and uh, and what we find is that God shows His mercy, as we're told elsewhere in the Gospels. Christ says, "If these days are not shortened, no one will be saved." So in His mercy, God shortens the days at the end. And the humankind is worn out by the end of the story, and humans, everybody is worn out, unless God cuts the time short, nobody will be saved. That's what Jesus tells us. So this last generation of humans, they do parallel Elijah, and God shows them mercy, and He takes them up into the heaven also, even before they physically die, though they may wish they want to die, considering what they may be going through. But they also receive an early retirement. They don't have to struggle on all the way until the end of life and when they die and decompose. But just like Elijah, they receive an early retirement because of what they've been through. And this all happens at the second coming of Christ. So these are some of the parallels between uh, the story of Elijah in the First Kings chapters 18 and 19, and the book of Revelation chapters 13 to all the way through 16, and then into 18, 17, 18, and 19. These two stories parallel each other, and it is a story in the book of Kings about a spiritual leader, a man who was completely burnt out, and God gave him an early retirement from his struggles. And this parallels the experience of all those in the end, all the people of God before the second coming of Christ, going through all these crazy things, Mount Carmel, spiritual battle, 10 plagues, and then they will also receive early retirement from the struggles and battles of this life, and they'll be taken up into heaven uh, at an early date, even before their lives expire. So that's the good news. Just like we have at the end of the story of Elijah, good news. He's taken up honorably into the heaven, into God's presence in the chariot of fire. So shall all those who happen to be alive when Jesus comes, all his people will have the same experience. So, who knows? Maybe some of us will be alive when that happens. May God bless you. Thank you for listening.